Welcome back to the Futurists. I am your host, Brett King. Rob is in transit to Muscat, Oman right now, so he isn't joining us today. But joining us from the GCC region, actually based in Dubai, is a futurist I only just recently met when I visited the UAE a couple of months ago, and he's been working on a very interesting project, which aligns, beautifully with the show. So it's a great opportunity to get him on. He is a futurist of note. He has history with Harvard Business Review, with the NBC, the Broadcasting Corporation in UAE. And he's just an all-round nice guy. Tariq Qureishy, welcome to the Futurists.
Brett, it is an absolute privilege and honor. I'm delighted to be here with you. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. Now, when we caught up last, you were still working on a project, but you've since launched it and released this project in the wild. And this is called Voices of the Future. And so, first of all, explain to me. I know it's in a book form, and you produced your own podcast, and you've had a cast of thousands who you've got involved in this, which is really interesting. But yeah. Tell us about the start of this project and what your objective was.
Brett, the objective has always been about making a difference, about finding a way to align with folks like yourself and others all over the world to bring about some good change and to have a happy future. I think that's the big picture. And then as I bring it together, over the last 8 years, as I reinvented myself from business life into futurism and into all of the work that I'm doing today, there were a lot of loose ends, and I needed to find a way to connect the dots. So what people actually ended up doing, I'm also based between Dubai and London, and the media calls me Voice of the Future. So they blew a smoke up my ass and sort of said, I think you should write a book about Voice of the Future, and you'll be the voice. And for about a week or so, I actually fell for my own bullshit. And I said, okay, I'll write Voice of the Future. And by the end of the first chapter, Brett, I realized that it's not about just my voice. And really the epiphany for me was the letter S, and it became Voices. And that is when it all exploded. The energy, the participation, the inclusion, and just the general collaboration that I found was massive. So that was the initial starting point. The second is that I can write reasonably well, but writing to me is hard work. Speaking to me is not. So my professor, my mentor, who sadly passed away a few years ago, Professor Tony Buzan, who was the inventor of mind mapping, and we did a lot of work together.
Oh, yeah.
And Tony and I were partners in crime, literally. And Tony asked me to write a few of his chapters in his 144 books that he published. And I always used to do it with trepidation because, when you're writing for a master, and he was known as the Plato of his time, of our time, I used to be quite nervous. Like, am I good enough? Can I get it right? So it always used to take me too long. And one day I was sitting there and Tony said, does your phone have a recording? He said, yes. And he said, press the button. He said, okay, now speak. And what are you doing? I said, you're bullying me. He said, yes, I'm your coach. I'm allowed to bully you. Speak. And I started speaking, and he said, just keep going. And within about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, I got into rhythm. And the epiphany for me and his coaching and guidance to me was that the connection between my brain and my hand is far slower than between my brain and my mouth. And that was the moment when I said, I will do all my writing as recordings, and then can transcribe them and then put them together. So the birth of
Voices. We have a recurring guest, Kevin J. Anderson, who has 56 international bestsellers and New York Times bestsellers. One of the preeminent science fiction authors of our generation. And
Yeah.
interestingly, Kevin took us through the process of his writing, and he
Right.
writes while he hikes through the Colorado wilds on his dictaphone. You know, he's got a digital version of that now. But and you know, I can understand it for someone like you and I who talking about the future, but he's doing plot lines in his head and character development and all of that sort of stuff. So I've admired that. But yeah, I mean it also is a fact that sort of um you know, media is changing a little bit, and
Indeed.
yes, you can still do the written word, but people are looking for the voice. They're looking for the short form video elements of this. The way we're consuming media has also changed, but so that started your creative process. But
Uh, yeah.
how did you go about building the team for the
Yeah.
voices?
So basically, that was the first part. So then I realized that I think what I should do is a 30 to 40 minute podcast, and that'll give me 30 to 40,000 words every time. And as I transcribe that, I can bring it down to 2,000 words as an article. I did 110 of those. So I have over 3.5 million words that I managed to grab through my podcast and brought it down to 110 articles, 330 pages, and so on. So that was the beginning. The second part was that every single podcast on my on the book itself has a QR code in there. So you're talking about how people communicate new media. So basically, you're looking at a book, you're reading the QR code, and you launch your video. So that's the second piece, your podcast, both audio and video podcast. The third thing was that we took the 3.5 million words and we put it into an LLM, into a ChatGPT model. And so you can query the book and say, you know, what does the book say about love? What does the book say about ethics or trust? And basically, we'll get a summary. And Brett said this, and Tariq said this, and so on. So basically, whichever angle you want to go in and consume the media, it's available in that process. And to me, this is a multimedia platform that I pulled together. So the second part of your question was, how did I start? The initial start was people I knew, people I've co-presented with, people I've connected with. So that started building that initial phase. I did not expect to do 110 interviews at the end, podcast interviews. It took 15 months.
That's a
People say
lot
it's
of
like
interviews.
having exactly. People said it's like having a baby, and I said no, it takes 9 months to have a baby. I took 15 months. It must be an elephant baby. It actually is an elephant baby because you know it looks like that. It's heavy, and it's about 1.5 kg as the book. So that's how initially I started. Now, a lot of people, I don't just focus on the tech side of the future. I look at trust and ethics and values and empathy. I look at that. I work closely in the environment and the ESG sector, so I look at that. I also have learning and development, so I look at that. So suddenly I started connecting the dots. And a little story about Rob Capello, who is in the book. He is a conductor of an orchestra. He does the New York Philharmonic Orchestra and so on. And he and I have co-presented about the future of listening and how we listen, how people listen, how we pull all of those things together. To me, that was quite a revelation, how to understand that. And what he spoke about was an orchestra and how an orchestra is like leadership. It's like a bit like the world. And to me, my realization from Voice to Voices was that I'm the conductor of the orchestra, and that was my new role. And that is how I changed in those 15 months from being a solo performer to a conductor of an orchestra and a collaborator of that music, that symphony, that synchronicity, that harmony, that connection, the crescendo that we can build together. That came together like that, and then it took its own energy. And then I met people through people, like I met you through my clerk. And people say, "Oh, you've got to interview this person. You've got to connect with that person." And then the rest, as they say, is history. It just flowed after that.
So Hans Zimmer put together a really interesting team for the Dune soundtrack. And he describes them as collection of virtuosos. And so certainly you've had some amazing guests contribute to the book and obviously to the podcast. But tell me about some of the moments that surprised you, that are memorable for you in the process.
Yeah. One of my most memorable ones was Shilpa Tenzin, who is a monk, works closely with the Dalai Lama. He talks about the future of peace, and he talks about peace. And in these moments, in these difficult moments, peace is very close to our hearts. And it was a fascinating conversation. He spoke about harmony and peace. His English is pretty good. And so he advises a lot of billionaires. And so he said, you can have money, but there's no there's no mental balance out there. And he opened me up into a completely new space of in terms of deep meditation, in terms of how bringing harmony and peace together. And I think that was one of my very memorable interviews, and it was very personal. It became very human and connected. Another one was the future of hope with Sujit. Sujit is on a wheelchair. He's 30 years old, and he lost his legs and it's T4 down. You see, he's paralyzed. And at 20, he was in a motorcycle accident. And he said something quite interesting. He said after he was in coma for about 3 months, and as he recovered, he said everybody came to visit me, and they were all feeling sorry for me. But all of them were telling me what I cannot do, what I will not be able to do, what I shouldn't be thinking about doing, how I should be thinking about the future, etc. And he said, there was a moment when I just snapped out of it, and I said, no, I will do whatever I wish to do, and I will find a way. And he talks about the future of hope. So here's a man with no legs, 30 years old. He's a basketball player. He's a motorcycle rider, and so on. And he's loves speed and he loves action. And now he's finding his own way back through hope. And he presents around that. And I was going through personally a vulnerable time at that stage on a personal level. And I was feeling sorry for myself and so on. And I listened to him and I said, enough of this nonsense. I mean, if folks like him, young people like him, can find hope when you can, in a moment of despair, that was my inspiration. So these were some of the moments which I really enjoyed. A lot of the senior business people that I spoke to, Brett, one of them was Serene Diom, who's the head of MTN FinTech in Africa. And about 15 minutes into the interview, he said, I have to stop. And I said, yes, Serene, of course. And he said, I have to talk about Maggie. I said, who's Maggie? Maggie's my wife. Maggie is my wife of 20 years. She has given me 4 beautiful children, but she is the inspiration in my life. And she has given me the balance, the strength, and the fortitude to go out there and become who I am today. And he said, and now I go out there and I'm working to help 100, 200, 300 million women in Africa, inspired by my wife and her love for me. So it wasn't a business story, Brett. It was a love story. So when we are talking about the future, it's not all about tech. It's actually about love. There's actually about hope. There's actually about that inner sense of peace and harmony. And that was my big realization, that we get so absorbed by technology that we actually forget that there's so much humanity out there. And that's the focus of my book and the focus of a lot of my futurism.
Well, I think, one of the things that we as futurists have in common is we do hope for a better future. And we're trying to accelerate that, or at least prepare people for that, and let them know that there is optionality and it can be a better future. But I like that concept that, the study of the future should be tied together with hope. We talk a lot about methodology. But I want to, before I get into your methodology as a futurist, let me ask you this. When did you realize that you wanted to be a voice of the future?
Yeah. Um, 24 years ago, I joined a company in Brussels, literally by accident. It's a company called Starlab. And I was a young MD brought in to help science and take it to business. And that was my first foray into the deep future. I didn't even realize that I was a futurist until 8 years ago. But the seeds were sown at that point in time. Always been creative and innovative, but that's different to actually getting into futurism. Uh, I started in 2016. I think that was the time when I was at Bloomberg, and I left Bloomberg and in 2016, and I said, what do I do now? Because I worked for all of the big organizations. I've headed Bloomberg Media. I was the publisher of the Times and Sunday Times and brought it to the Middle East. I was the head of Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I'd done all the media part of it. Now it was really a question of how do I live the next stage of my life. I was at halftime, almost 50, and I sort of said, what do I do now? And that's when I reinvented myself, and I ended up defining myself into the world of the future. And I didn't even realize how I was shaping it. It came by iteration and by learning, by research, by development from that point onwards. And that's how I ended up where I am today as a futurist. I'm not that techie. I'm techie enough, but on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll probably give myself about a 5 or a 6. But I'm very, very intuitive. I'm very empathetic. I'm very connected with humanity. I do a lot of social work. I do a lot of teaching. I work with young children. I work with old people. My mum, who passed away until recently, I used to work with her and do a lot of charity work with her. So I was very humanly connected, and I felt that that would be my differentiation. And I went into trust, and I did a deep dive into ethics in AI, and I started building manifestos around drones and drone manifestos and around that kind of technology, looking at the ethics. And I was talking about ethics about 8 years ago, 7 years ago, when it wasn't fashionable, and people thought I had just become a priest and I had hit midlife crisis too early. So, why would you be talking about ethics? And you're talking about this cool stuff called AI and machine learning, and you're boring us with ethics. So this is the sort of thing that I evolved through. I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. So you decided to become the high priest of futurism.
Yes, at a very early stage, yes, we did.
Well,
And
we're
that's how I differentiated myself, because I used to go up there and my first slide was on trust. I used to ask people, what's the most important thing in the future? And everybody was saying AI and tech and blockchain and so on. I said, no, it's actually trust. And the trust deficit is so huge. That is what needs to be bridged in some way. We don't trust our governments, our institutions, our organizations. Nobody trusts banks. So trust became a core thesis of my work.
Well, we can definitely talk about that and in the second part of the show. And
Sure.
I want to talk a bit more about your methodology as a futurist as well, in terms of how you do your forecasting and so forth. But before we go to our break, we like to do something we call a lightning round, quick fire round, asking a
Okay.
few questions. Try and
Yeah.
keep your answers short and punchy. It's just to help our listeners get to know you a little better. So
Sure.
here we go. The lightning round.
Yeah.
Tariq, what was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to? It could be TV, books, or movies.
Star Trek. Very, very early days, Star Trek.
What?
And I have been a
Go
Trekkie all
ahead.
my life. Yeah. And I've been a Trekkie all my life, and it fascinated me at a very early stage, and that just caught my imagination.
A Trekker. Yes.
Yes.
Depends, right? Depends on
Yeah.
which. If you're, it seems like Next Generation is Trekker and the original series is Trekkie. But anyway, all right. So, what technology? You said you're not a technologist, but what technology has most influenced or changed humanity? Do you think?
I think more recently, obviously, it's AI and where AI is going, and you know, for about the earliest days of AI was in 1950s. But it took about 30, 40 years before it really started gathering momentum. And now it's effectively taking off. To me, I think that is the single most important new development that there is. The other one, I know it's very cliched, but is the smartphone. And I realized that my life fundamentally changed at that point in time, in every single way, and in business, in communication, and so on. Prior to that, I was doing some charitable work, and I created something called Mobile Aid, which is giving a donation through SMS. It was in 2004. I was one of the earliest movers in the world on that. And I was struggling with SMS, but now with a smartphone, there are so many payment methods because I was focusing on micro donations. And I was anticipating that, but I wasn't quite there. But when it actually arrived, I did start going back into that phone again, but lots of compliance issues and so on. But I think the smartphone changed my life.
Here's a great stat to support that. What percentage of internet access comes through a smartphone today? It's globally, it's 91%.
Right.
That's a great stat. Yeah.
That is a great stat. Yeah.
Yeah. Name a futurist or an entrepreneur that has influenced you and why.
A futurist, people like Buckminster Fuller has impacted me a lot. I know he wasn't a futurist, but Professor Tony Buzan, who was the inventor of mind mapping, the way he saw and looked at the brain, and my library here is full of his books, he actually opened up my brain to thinking like a futurist, way more than what I would call our traditional futurists. Another person who inspired me in a presentation about 7, 8 years ago was Peter Diamandis. When he spoke about moonshots, and I was mesmerized. He was talking about moonshots. This is 8 years, 9 years ago, and I said, "This is it. These are the kind of challenges that I'd like to deal with as far as the future is concerned." And then I got involved with Singularity University, and Salim Ismail and I are business partners, and the rest is history. But these were some of my early influences.
All right, and finally, is there a science fiction story that's representative of the future that you hope for?
I'll go back to Star Trek.
Yeah, I guess so. I'll
go back to Star Trek. I'll go back to Star Trek again rather than Mad Max environment. I would say that that probably is the most relevant movie that I can think of at this moment in time, and looking at Star Trek Future. That's one of them. I can't think of any other at this moment in time. Okay. If it comes to me, I will get back to it.
No problem. All right, you're listening to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King. We're with Tariq Qureishy talking about voices of the future. We're going to be right back after this quick break. Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm with Tariq Qureishy, and we're talking to him about his project that he's been doing out of Dubai and London, The Voices of the Future, which is now a book, soon to be a best-selling book, and also a podcast series with many interviews. How many people did you interview in total for the book, Tariq?
110. 110 podcasts, all in our podcast platform, which is vof.world. And that's where the start happened, and then transcribed everything and put the book together.
Now let's talk about your methodology as a futurist. When you're looking at impact and you're looking at the future, how do you go about? You said you're not a technologist, but you can spot trends. So what is it that you do to inform your forecast of the future?
Yeah. My starting point is that I do a lot of research, and interestingly, a lot of my research goes deep in terms of I'll take a topic and then I'll start reviewing that. The second thing, over the time, as we look at our 10,000 hours of mastery. As I've crossed the 10,000 hours of that, I'm able to start connecting the dots between the environmental activities that are going on and finance and blockchain and so on, and the convergence of the various technologies coming together. That has been one of my core theses. Surprisingly and interestingly, I also do a lot of work on YouTube. I actually literally go through and keep connecting and see what people are saying, and then go back to my base level core research and see if it actually starts connecting. So basically, avid reader, looking at trends that are happening. I'm also, over this time, I've become an avid listener. I've become a very, very good listener, because in the past, I was too busy talking. Over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I've been too busy listening. And I think that's been one of my other areas. Then I mind map. My core methodology is to put an idea at the center and start mind mapping and connecting the dots. And that has become my sort of visual stimulus of being able to see left and right. And I have a huge wall in my office that I keep connecting dots and writing on. And say, hang on, I heard this from Brett, and I heard that from Gerd Leonard, and I heard this from Selena Smile, and where does this whole thing come together? And I put that in one place. And I articulate it through stories. I speak in metaphors, and I share stories. And that's sort of my base methodology of putting it together.
Now, you've mentioned, we've had Gerd on the show, of course, and after running this show for a couple of years, we've had some wonderful futurists on, you do start to see some patterns. You start to see some convergence. So, in the 110 interviews that you did for the Voices of the Future, tell us about where you see those synergies, or where you see those timelines merging together. What are some of the common themes that kept coming up time and again with the futurists that you spoke to?
Sure. Gerd is a great example. A lot of my philosophy, a lot of my work is very close to where Gerd is. And I think that aligned with me beautifully. And as we created this beautiful wall of 110 speakers here, we had about 20 on digital futures and technologies and so on. And interestingly enough, the vast majority of them spoke about going back to humanity. And that was one of my core themes that have come through, is that as we are evolving, as we're maturing, we're becoming less at least a lot of the people I interviewed, less focused on the pure technology, and much more focused on how it impacts humanity. The phrase that I use is that the technology, and that was one of the things I encountered in there, technology is like a horse. It's bigger, faster, and stronger than us. And AI, I use an example of AI, but we ride it, we learn how to ride it. And I think that's one of the themes that came through of how we can address that. The third area was convergence. Almost all of them spoke about all of these various technologies coming together and converging and creating unexpected consequences. Because Gutenberg came up with one invention in 1563, the world changed, the religion changed, commerce changed, education changed. One invention. Today we have 25, 30 of those Gutenberg moments happening simultaneously. And that convergence is what a lot of people spoke about. I think that was another core theme that was there. I asked the question about, and I asked you the same one too, is that your 100th birthday, if we were to celebrate, what would you find? And of the 110 speakers, a lot of them are billionaires and very successful entrepreneurs and so on, rags to riches stories and so on. But not one person spoke about money or the physical aspects of their achievement. They all spoke about love and family and connection and so on. So I think my part of my thesis that came through and my learning that came through on this one was that I think at the end of the day, as human beings, That is our core. And I think we should stay with that. Because at the end of the day, nobody was worried about how much money they had in the bank. So those are some of our themes. I was less optimistic about people's response as far as the environment is concerned. And I found that that was an area where we still need a lot of work to be done. And while I was doing this, COP28 was going on in Dubai. And really a lot of them were sort of saying it's just a lot of incremental stuff going on. And this comment came through regularly. So that is something else that came through, that we need to do 10 times more. Learning and development was another area which needs a huge amount of shift and change. Education and our learning systems are such that they're not preparing our kids for the future. They're not preparing us grown-ups for the future. So that theme came through not in a negative way, but in a way that we need to be really working and developing on that front. These are some of the trends that I've come through. I know they sound very simplistic, but I think I found that when you ask simple human questions to some of the most complex people, they come up with that synthesis of thought. And a lot of simple
one of the
things came
things that makes them good at communicating the future is being able to make complex ideas understandable, I guess, right?
Indeed. I mean, I just opened a book. I mean, the book is designed like a Arabian Nights, and you can literally open the book at any, and I need to send you your hard copy, Brett. We need to find you in one place so that I can send it to you. And literally, you have a cup of coffee in your hand, and then you open a book, and I just opened one, and it was Eric Anderson. Eric Anderson owns Singularity University, amongst other things, and he's a very successful VC and so on. And interestingly enough, when I started talking to him, I asked him what influenced him in his early life. And he said for the first 10 to 12 years of his life, he was looked after by nurses because his mother was developing a nursing college. And she, in California, she has many of these nursing training schools and so on. And he said, I grew up with being nurtured and with a lot of empathy and humanity around me. And he said, every decision that I make, and the happiness that I get when I do any kind of business, I see it through that lens. And who knew? Who knew that somebody like Eric, who's a hardcore VC guy, actually sees it through the lens of empathy? And that to me was absolutely, it is. And I mean, he was one of the investors in Topgolf, and he shared a story, and he said. He said my happiest moment in Topgolf wasn't the amount of money that I made, but a mother who said that her 12-year-old or 10-year-old child who had cancer, the only time the child smiled and got excited was when he went on Topgolf and played there, and he just used to forget about his cancer and about his difficulties. He said that was the moment I knew that I was on the right track, and he made a lot of his decisions like that. So lots and lots of stories like that came through, beautiful stories. Nyomuki from Africa, from Botswana, she was the little girl with a Casio calculator in her hand sitting under a tree, and then she had to go and she was 4 or 5 years of age, and she had to go to the river and bring water. And you know, those images of Africa that we see, little girls coming in with water for the day. She was one of them. And she managed to get a scholarship, and then went to high school, and then to Cardiff University, Oxford, and now she's the head of Generali, running a $350 billion fund. And I said to her, so what the hell are you going to be doing about all of your learnings through life? And she said, my decisions, because I'm a bit of an activist when it comes to making rich people richer. And I said, you're just making rich organizations with more and more money. And she said, but I'm doing all my investment through the lens of women empowerment, through the environment, because I grew up in Africa, and various other basic values that she had encountered in her early life, in her development. She is using them in her work and business today. So behind the curtain, there are a lot of these stories which we never encounter. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things I discovered.
So, talk to me about, in terms of the collective. I wonder what is the collective noun for a group of futurists? That's an interesting thought. Well,
What is the collective noun? Um, I had a very interesting conversation with Professor Hendrik von Schiele, and he was on the he was online on the launch day when you were there too. Very kindly,
yes,
you joined us, and he well, I mean, he's a creative genius, and he's a, as he calls himself, he's double dyslexic. Not only can he not read words, but he doesn't know the difference between night and day when he reads it, or black and white. And then he had to work through. Uh, but another part of his brain is pure genius. And while he was talking to me, he created a little diagram, which he put in here, which is in the book itself. And he spoke about the research side, and then he spoke about the storytelling side. And he said the vendors and stuff are in the middle. So he actually created a schematic diagram. And he said people like myself are futurist storytellers, where we can connect with what's happening in terms of the research piece, and then on the other side, in terms of media. And we are amongst the few people that actually can connect the two dots. So he gave me a new definition of how I should be describing myself in the future. So these are the kinds of things that which I found fascinating as they came through, and it's a treasure trove of things that are and especially when they all come together. And like I said, it's Arabian Nights. It's one story at a time. You know the story
yes.
of Arabian. I mean,
Of course.
Shahrazad had to keep continuing telling her stories because that's how she could stay alive. And I said, here are 100 stories. That keeps us going for about a couple of years. If we do a story a week or something. And then everyone has an essence of something special, focused on the future, but grounded in humanity and all the core human values that we have.
Mm. Well, I think when we look at the sort of core human values and so forth, there are some challenges. We have let ourselves get into a very precarious situation in terms of the environment, but you have a lot to be optimistic for in the voices of the future, talking about how we can adapt to the future. So talk to me about how we get through the next 30 years. And what are some of the gems that came out of the interview series that struck you as, yeah, that makes a lot of sense?
One of the key elements there was that the more technological we are becoming, the more human we need to be. Because anything that can be digitized will be, because it'll be a million times faster and a million times cheaper. But anything that cannot, love, harmony, empathy, imagination, heart, spirit, soul, wisdom, common sense, judgment, all of these things are going to be a million times more valuable. And that was one of the core messages that came through. And as we go into the future, one of the critical things that will keep us going is essentially that, going back to our core baseline. And I go back to the analogy of riding a horse, and that's what it is. Our technologies are stuff. They're there to serve us. They're there to support us. But we need to learn how to ride them. That was one of the key messages that came through. Amongst the stories, a lot of them were quite unexpected in terms of how people started. And they were rags to riches stories. There were people who started very humbly and became great athletes and great VCs and billionaires and so on. And I found that whole thing about scaling quite fascinating. So how do we engage ourselves and develop ourselves over the next 30 years? I think we just need to remain more human, keep close to our core values, stay on top of all of the technological developments that are taking place, and one of the messages was about Gen Z. Gen Z and Gen Alpha getting a very bad rap. And one of the things that came through, interestingly enough, was that I think Gen Z are doing a lot of amazing new things. They think differently. And we need to find a way in terms of understanding them from a completely different lens. And that was another message that came through, because these young people, Gen Z, born after 1996, are generally going to go around changing the world.
They're not married to our traditional systems like
Yeah.
capitalism and things like that. They don't think it's worked. And
Yeah.
they're looking to explore something different. All right, so let's look out to 2050.
Yeah.
And let's give your your perception here, but feel free to borrow from some of the futurists. What's the world look like? What's different? What has stayed the same? But what inspires you and makes you hopeful about the future in that time frame?
The big challenges and that singularity and SpaceX and X Prize and all the others, I'm quite inspired with several of them. I think my biggest concern is the environment. I don't think we're going in the right direction. Sadly, as long as there's money in oil and there is about $5 trillion worth of assets in there, I don't think they're going to do anything. I think the capital structure that we have and the capitalist structure that we have in the world at this moment in time is not serving the future. And I think that really needs to fundamentally change. Institutions were designed 80, 90 years ago for problems 80, 90 years ago, and they don't serve us. So we need a new Bretton Woods convention. And this should talk about the future of learning and thinking. We should be looking at the future of the health of our climate, the ethics and governance of the way we work. So I think a United Nations of the future is one of the things that we need to be looking at. And I'd love to be
Kim Stanley Robinson, who was a guest on the show, he wrote a book called Ministry for the Future.
Okay.
And it's I'm surprised that more governments don't have ministers for the future.
Yep.
Stockholm, Sweden has one because we've interviewed him on the show. But that's about it. But you think that I think corporations should have a chief futurist. And I think government should have them as well. I think, to be future ready, you have to think about adapting the systems we have and diverging, from the poor decisions that have got us here, as you say.
Yeah. I think my greatest contribution will be in learning and development, which is where I feel I have the greatest flair, both at a human level and at connecting with people in terms of their mindset, because we need a lot of mindset shift. We are stuck with our own immune systems, and our internal immune systems are
well.
slowing us.
This project you're doing is important in that, but and obviously we're happy to support you with that. But how do we give these voices more airtime?
I think their stories need to be told in the way that they have been shared in Voices of the Future, not in terms of titles and achievements, but in terms of how they've inspired the world. Each story has its own merit. Why don't we identify 10 or 15 of them and perhaps highlight them and bring them to the fore, because they would deliver a message to the futurists, to this podcast, to your platform, to your listeners, in a way that would be very special and unexpected.
Okay, well, I think that's great. Let's identify a few of those, and we can play some clips from your podcast, for our audience as well. Maybe put that on our website so people can get access. Of course, we'll be happy to link to your site as well. For people who are listening to this and want to find out more about the project, of course they can search on Voices of the Future. But what's the easiest way to find this project and this collection of insights that you put together?
The website is www.vof.world. So easy to remember, wof.world. That is the resource which has all of the podcasts there, and all of the links will come out from there. Obviously, it is on YouTube, but I haven't done my Apple sort of a platform as well as I should. It's still early days, but hopefully over the summer I'll get that thing sorted out. So the best place is wof.world, and everything else just basically connects and flows from there.
And if people want to follow you specifically, Tariq, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to follow you on the socials?
LinkedIn is the easiest. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And Instagram and Facebook would be the next. I mean, not as active on Twitter as I should be, I've been told. But Tariq.tv, Tariq.tv is my handle on Instagram. And I'm easily connected there, and happy to share any of the stuff. And this entire project is about making a difference, Brett. It is not a financial money-making project. It is designed at this point in time to actually share, connect, enhance, amplify, this all of these voices coming together to bring about some good change. And we have the access and the capability of doing that. Let's use this opportunity to be able to build that platform to help people and make a difference.
Well,
and make a difference. Make a difference is MAD, and one of my companies called MAD. So I am completely stark, raving, bloody mad. So that's why I called it MAD. And mad people are eccentric people, and we are off center. And if in the normal distribution curve, people like you and I are in the last 1 or 2% on the edges, because everybody else is norming themselves, and we are abnormal. We are mavericks. We are on the extremes, and we are basically mad. So, and it also means making a difference.
Very cool. Well, Tariq Qureishy, thanks for joining us on The Futurists today. All the best with the Voices of the Future project. That's vof.world if you want to check it out. And inspirational story. And we're grateful for futurists like yourself that are putting in the work to help people have an optimistic view of the future if we're just prepared to do the work, to think about building the best future possible for our children, our grandchildren, and the human race in total. And that may require some fairly significant philosophical shifts, but the technology is not the problem. We can solve the problems that we have if we just get out of our own way, I guess, is the answer, right? So, Tariq, thanks for joining us on The Futurist today.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks very much indeed. I look forward to great collaboration in the future. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's it for this week. Rob and I'll be back with another guest next week. If you like the show, don't forget to tweet us out or share it, whether it's on YouTube or on the podcasting platforms or on social media. If you've got a guest that you'd like us to interview, please let us know. And by all means, please leave us a review or tweet us out or post on LinkedIn or whatever. All of that helps people find the show and find this great content that we spend so much time putting together. My thanks also to the team at Provoke, to Lisbeth Severance, our producer, Kevin Hersham, our audio engineer, and the entire team there. That's it for this week. Until then, you know the drill. We'll see you in the future.